Paris Live guest.
And now for our monthly get-together with the Africa Report magazine here on Paris Live. I'm joined in the studio today by the Africa Report's managing editor, Nick Norbrook. Great to have you back on the programme, Nick.
Hi, David. How are you doing?
Great. And I have to say, it's great to have you back on the show. And today we're going to look at two things. If we can get to the second, which is Cyril Ramaphosa, who is South Africa's president. And of course,
we must get to
we
Cyril.
have to get to Cyril. It is this weekend, South Africa is marking the 25th anniversary of the arrival of democracy in the country, but also this is all ahead of elections that are happening later in May. But first, what is really kind of rolling is the actuality also coming out today are the protests in Sudan. And in the latest edition of the Africa Report, there is an article called Sudan's Long Walk to Freedom. Now, if I may just take from this, the article opens with a warning saying that any swift transition to democratic rule in Sudan could further deepen tensions that already exist in the country. And then this is also prosecutors' demands are coming out, and momentum represent a milestone for Sudan, and that's all well and good, but the country faces several crucial challenges before it can transition to democracy. So just give us a little background to this article and who wrote it.
Well, Andrew Cheer, who's a fellow at the International Institute of Strategic Studies and also an academic in the UK, he wrote us this opinion column, which, it's called an opinion column, which I think does disservice to the very scholarly approach he takes in it. And it's essentially a warning about rushing things.
Yeah.
His argument essentially is that, it's a very, very delicate inflection point that the country is currently in, which could go in various different ways. And indeed, even in very recent times, we've seen protest movements, uprisings, change the political dynamics of a country like Egypt. And then suddenly, we've almost regressed exactly
implode,
to where we start.
One could almost say.
Yeah, well, I mean, we started out with Mubarak in Egypt, and we've ended up with El-Sisi, who wants to rule beyond 2030. So, things actually haven't changed.
And one of the warnings is, Sudan has got a very, very, very violent past, and key rebel groups have to really participate in the negotiations and the settlements that are being put on the table today, or at least at the calls that are being put there, that it's really trying to be inclusive. But there are also warnings of international meddling. There's a stark warning saying, look, that people outside of the Sudanese political sphere, which is a very complex, should really just back off and let the Sudanese sort it out themselves. But your journalist, he goes through it point by point. First and foremost, and of course at the moment there is an interim transitional period that is being run by the military, but it is an issue that is, number one, is security reform.
That's right. I think that has to be front and centre, because it was the military who ran the country and have done for over 30 years now. And this military is divided. There are elements which backed the protesters. There are elements who need to be placated and drawn into the process. Otherwise, another potential scenario is, okay, if they look east, they can see what's happened in Egypt. If they look west in Sudan, they can see what's happened in Libya, where you get different factions controlling different parts of the country with a particular strongman in one area. And I think that could absolutely be a scenario that happens if, for example, one wing of the military still wants to hold out. So I think, a transition period where they try to buy in support from all of those different parts of the military is absolutely essential.
And the other thing one must look at, even if you look at the geography of Sudan, no different to Egypt further to the north, structural marginalization has really been a thing, because, both countries have been... The economic flow of the country was up and down the Nile. How can they address structural marginalization through reforms when things are still very much up in the air? But it's still an issue that has to be tackled.
Well, I think that's going to be absolutely critical as well. The marginalization of people, we had uprisings in Darfur, decades ago, viciously repressed, which is one of the reasons why al-Bashir probably should see the inside of a prison cell for the foreseeable future.
But nobody's willing to give him up, though, at this stage.
Currently not, but I think that then loops back into this security question. If you have elements of the security services who see Bashir get handed over to The Hague, will they not think, well, I may as well just start up a rebel movement because it's going to be better for me in the long run? And that is a real risk. And a broader point, which another analyst was making to us recently was, how do you deal with Islamist parties? The country's been run by an Islamist party for, again, over 30 years. Although currently the protesters say, it's time to spit on the Islamists, and they have various more flowery ways of saying that, but the feeling on the street might be incredibly anti-Islamists. This possibly should be a moment where vengefulness is set aside.
It did. Well, I mean, even today, coming over the wires, we have what would you call him? A veteran? I mean, we're talking old school politician. This is Sadiq al-Mahdi, an opposition politician who himself is an Islamist. Himself and Hassan al-Turabi were both leaders in Sudan before they were ousted in 1989. But saying, I quote him today, that Sudan could face a counter coup if the military rulers and the opposition don't reach an agreement on transitioning power. So, I mean, these are the old school who are coming up and saying, look, we tried this before in the past, and look where it got us. So going back to the article itself, it goes through the establishment of governance, elections without reform, all of these very essential kind of keystone steps, if you will, going across the board. But also it's dealing with armed groups in Sudan, reeling them all in, getting everybody around the table, and an inclusive political process. But how can all this be done when the economic outlook in Sudan at the moment is already very weak, despite the boom years a few years ago? How can this all be done in such a period of flux, if you will?
Well, I guess it all depends whose money you want to take. There is an incredible push by the UAE and by Saudi Arabia to be involved in the transition. One of the big structural changes in Sudan since about 2015 is that they flipped their allegiance away from Iran and towards the UAE and Saudi Arabia.
Bashir wasn't allowed to fly over Saudi Arabia at one stage because of the allegiance with Iran.
Right. And so
they pulled him in.
And Bashir, one of the things he was good at, because I guess if you run a country for several decades, you must be good at something. He was very good at juggling those two power bases within it, which is really the third rail, isn't it, of politics in the region. He managed to negotiate that very, very well. Now, another danger for the transition is that you have elements within the military who are being leaned on by the UAE, by Saudi Arabia, and also by Iran, who see this as a great moment to sort of advance their pawns in the situation. Now, Ethiopia benefited from a few very hefty checks when Abiy agreed to make peace with Eritrea and, open up the sea routes and strategic seaports opposite Yemen. Because for the UAE and Saudi Arabia, this war with Yemen is everything that they care about. And I think this will maybe play a role here with the economics if they can, get a check cut for a few billions. However, on the street, the mood is, we don't want your money. We don't want your meddling. We want to sort this out by ourselves. And I mean, a fair few economists say that there are some low-hanging fruit there. There are a lot of military expenses which are essentially, people putting their hand in the quartermaster's pocket.
Yeah,
and there are some things that can be done to stabilize the economy.
Okay, and indeed it is a rolling story, and we shall wait and see. And that indeed is some very good article that should be looked into on Sudan's long walk to freedom. We are getting to Cyril Ramaphosa. We are getting to Cyril Ramaphosa, and this is all about Ramaphosa's destiny. This is a great little snapshot of the man himself, with personal interviews with people who have been in and out of his entourage over the past decades. Now, of course, with elections just over the horizon and at the beginning of May, the question being asked is, does the formula that Cyril Ramaphosa add up for South Africa? Does it all equate? So what is the outcome of the article, in your opinion?
Well,
is it working? Will it work?
That is the, allowing for inflation, $57 billion question. I think the key thing we wanted to get across is that Cyril Ramaphosa is an incredible builder of coalitions. This is a man who is able to sit down with the unions. He, organized and created the National Union of Mine Workers. This is also a man who's able to sit down with board members of McDonald's. This is a man who can sit well with the evangelical church movement and then talk to senior communists who have their own views.
Comrade Ramaphosa, but he's also a multimillionaire. Now, will the rhetoric that Julius Malema from the EFF said about you should go back to flipping burgers at McDonald's rather than leaving the politics to the real politicians?
Well,
will that be the kind of stuff he's going to be facing on the hustings?
I think they will be much sharper, though. Actually, the sort of the barbs that will be thrown will be much more around Cyril Ramaphosa's own personal fortune in the mining industry, his connection to mining companies who are involved with the massacres in Marikana, and those will be thrown at him thick and fast come election day.
And there's only a few days ahead for it. My thanks there to Nick Norbrook from the Africa Report.
Thank you.